Slash discussion. If you're not aware of that, then you are now. The topic tonight is, does the Christian God exist and why does it matter? So it's hosted by four organizations: the Secular Student Alliance, Unbelievers Radio, Desertton Church, and Desertton Students. Just a couple of house rules. Please be quiet during the presentation, so there will be a time to ask questions afterwards. We're also doing some recording, so no shouting out, no sort of standing up. So there will be a time to ask all questions, which reminds me, there's two things on your chair. One is just a blank note card that can be used either for comments at the end or questions that will be submitted during the Q&A session. The other one is just if you want more information about one of the groups, just check the box, and then when you put it in the little bin, one of those groups will contact you. Also, both speakers will be around afterwards for question and answer, so if your question doesn't get answered, or if you want to really dive in on a subject with them, they'll be at their respective tables to do so. And then Forrest is our moderator, and our presenters will introduce themselves. So I'm going to hand it over to Forrest, who will take it.
Don't clap for me, I'm not doing much. Alright, so I'm just basically here to lay out the format first. I'm not going to be doing much tonight. It's going to be a very casual debate. We're going to start off by letting John introduce himself, and Spencer will introduce himself as well. After that, John will give his 15-minute opening statement. Spencer will then give his 15-minute opening statement. From there, we're going to move on to 30 or 20 minutes rather of conversation and cross-examination. After that, each will give a 5-minute closing statement, starting with Spencer, ending with John. And then at that time, if you bring your Q&A cards to the back at the Secular Student Alliance table, there will be someone there to collect those. And we'll take a 3-minute break then. After we collect all those cards, there's also more cards back there if you have more questions. We'll come back and we'll be reading the questions up here and they'll be answering those. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to
Well, my name is John Meyer, and I'm going to be the religious old guy up here tonight. I'm not quite old enough to have known any of the biblical characters personally, but been doing religious things for a long time. Been a pastor for over 30 years. Currently have a job where I kind of coach churches and pastors. But probably the reason that I'm standing here today is a crisis of faith I faced when I was in the season of life that a lot of you were in, as a freshman in college. And I had taken a couple years off after I graduated from high school to go and live some of my dreams. That resulted in some unexpected spiritual searching that resulted in me going back to college as a pre-med major and also committing my life and becoming a born-again Christian. Those two things led me to that crisis in faith. And as I got more and more engaged in my pre-med major, in my biology classes, really enjoying an intense love for science, and at the same time deepening in my Christian faith, I realized that something would have to change. Because every week I was learning more and more reasons why the Bible was not true. And every week, I was learning more and more from the Bible about how it made a larger and larger claim on my life. The resolution of that crisis of faith has really oriented a lot of the rest of my life. And of course, many of us face crises like that when we go to college or when we enter adulthood with our faith. And it's been a centering thing for me ever since. So we are here to examine questions that I know both Spencer and I would say are very important. I don't know how much Spencer and I agree on. We've never done anything like this before. We may find that there are actually a few things we agree on. But one thing I know we do agree on is that these issues are really important. And we're really glad that you're here, and we're looking forward, one, to being challenged by one another, and to letting you engage in that also, in the question and answer time. I guess I just want to say one other thing. Though these issues are critically important, I think we can also say this, that we can also just relax here. In the next 60 minutes, we are not going to determine this question for the rest of the world. But you will get to hear two people who've thought a lot about this. And you'll get to hear them challenge one another, and you'll get to be part of that. And my hope, and I can honestly say my prayer, is that each person here will feel like you have been challenged in your own beliefs and understandings, and that you will walk away from here with questions that you want to wrestle with that will help you come closer to an understanding of the truth. Maybe I'll just add one more thing. In a room like this, there's probably 2 or 3 people in this room who have not made up their mind yet. Most of us probably have already come from a perspective. And I just want you to value the opportunity to hear someone who has thought deeply about a view that you don't hold, and to respect that intellectual pursuit and those thoughts that have arrived at that different position. And I respect Spencer, and I'm really thankful we get to do this, and I'm really looking forward to it.
I want to thank you guys also for coming out. It's a pretty good turnout. This debate, I want to also thank John and Brandon and everyone from Desert Send Community Church for helping organize it. All the cool flyers and all the organization that went into it, I think, was in large part because of Sean and Brandon and everybody. So I want to thank you guys for that especially. This is the first time I have heard this is the first time I've ever heard John argue or give arguments for the Christian God, and I have just learned about his theological position within the last day or two. I have picked up some of their work, their books that they hand out on campus. Some of you, if you're students, you may have seen they set up banners around the stage by the MU, and then the big creation banners, and they say stuff about Darwin and the Bible and all that stuff. So maybe we'll be getting into that. I don't know actually where John is going to be coming from or any of his arguments. So I'm looking forward to that just as much as everyone else here. And what he just spoke about having a crisis of faith in college and having that be his, or I actually haven't heard his testimony or his experiences up to this point, so that was also new for me. And during the back and forth period, we'll probably be asking more questions about that stuff. But just to repeat some of the things that John said, I think that we do want to challenge beliefs and to question what we believe and look at the reasons why we believe it. I think that's very important. And I think everyone here wouldn't have shown up if they didn't already have those assumptions and that kind of an attitude about the things that they believe. So that's really good. That's a place where we can have common ground where we agree. One thing you did say that we should respect other people's beliefs. I think we should respect people, but there are some beliefs that some people hold that I don't think necessarily deserve respect. And they should be criticized and they shouldn't be protected just because people believe them strongly. So maybe that is something we can also discuss. But without further ado, I don't want to take up any more time. We want to get to the opening statements and let's get this party started.
Okay, I'm going to move this. Start my timer here. We didn't want to bore you, so we are just giving ourselves 15 minutes to present a perspective. And really, so all I'm going to do is I'm just going to share with you why I believe. I'm not going to share with you that you should believe it for those same reasons. I'm just going to share with you what I believe, and Spencer can then challenge that. But these are the things that have been very significant to me in my own life and bringing me to the position I hold, which is a conservative Christian position. Okay. Does a Christian God exist, and why does it matter? Really, to answer that question, you really have to answer 3 questions. And the first question is, does any God exist? Is there anybody out there? And then once you establish that really there is somebody out there, then I think does the big G God exist? A personal God, the God that we would consider the God of the Bible. Do we have a reason to think that God exists? Or at least what's my reason to think that? And then of course the third question is, does the Christian God exist? Oops, I'm one behind here. And so I just want to walk through those, and I'll probably spend most of my time here on the first one because that also maps over into the other 3. Does God exist? Or Really what it comes down to is, does everything come from someone or something? There's really just two possibilities. Everybody recognizes we all come from something. There's some source or some beginning. You go back and it's all from somewhere. And when you evaluate what are the possibilities, there's really two big categories. We either come from that which is impersonal. We come from chemistry. We come from nothing. We come from energy. Or we come from a source that's personal. We come from someone. And everything boils down to one of those two possibilities. When you list all of them, they're in one of those two categories. Okay? And of course, I believe that someone exists. I believe there is a God. And for me, this has been a very profound thing, even in my understanding of what it means to be human. And I believe in God because of scientific evidence. This has been a very big thing in my world, and I'll only mention these. One is the complexity of genetics, and the other would be the origin of life. The origin of life is the first thing I engaged with when I was in college, and year after year, as time goes by, science uncovers more and more reasons why chemicals can never turn into living things, mostly because of the complexity issue. And I could talk about that a long time. I have a hard drive full of PowerPoints on that subject, but I won't go into detail about it now unless it comes up in more questions later. Genetics is the same thing. As time goes by, what was once assumed to be very simple by the people that began proposing naturalistic explanations now is known to be extremely complex. And so for me, I have come to a point where I am absolutely settled without a shadow of doubt in my own mind that science shows that there is some form of intelligence organizing living systems. Now, I recognize I don't have a graduate degree in biology or any life science. I have an undergraduate in biology and computer science. I graduated with honors. I paid attention, but it doesn't mean I know anything. So why can I stand in front of a whole bunch of really smart people and say I think they're wrong? Well, I have a number of reasons for that. One would just be that there really are an awful lot of people who also somehow find a belief in God where they place themselves, or a belief in a designer, a belief in a creator. And one of the things that's out there is there's a bunch of surveys that keep getting done by all kinds of organizations, and what they discover is that lots of us believe that somehow life has come from God. And George Barna has been doing a study for about 30 years, and you can't probably read these numbers, but what they tell us is that no matter how much time goes by, everybody keeps believing about the same thing, and most people believe that somehow God is responsible for life. Most people will tell George Gallup, that the Bible has the closest to the right story. A number of people will say God used evolution. But from 1982, when the first survey was taken, till last year, the numbers pretty much stay the same. Even here at ASU, trust we would call this an educated environment, and certainly a secular environment. If I was going to take a slice of America, I would say there would be very few that would be more secular or more educated than in a university like this. This last week, we did a survey of over 700 students, and we discovered, when we asked this question, do you believe life was somehow originated from God? I was really surprised. 55% of people said yes. So somehow there's something in us that keeps bringing us this notion that there's somebody there. And we can say, well, John, that doesn't necessarily mean it's scientific, but even surveys of scientists find that. A survey done by a secularist, a humanist organization, not looking to find religious belief, found a lot of things, including that 46% of those with graduate or professional degrees disagree with the statement, evolution is the best possible explanation of human existence, meaning there has to be something else there. So there's a lot of people who have gotten their scientific education in an exclusively materialistic, educational, evolutionary-oriented system who don't find themselves able to accept it. And there are many of those people writing very good material saying why they don't. I find myself in good company when I hold the view I hold. One of my favorites is a man who would call himself, or before he died, the most notorious atheist. He was a very strong, outspoken, vocal atheist long before Richard Dawkins ever showed up on the scene. And near the end of his life, he changed his view. It was a notorious change, a profound impact in the world of belief and unbelief. And he said this, Antony Flew, there's his reasons. One was my growing empathy with the insight of Einstein and other noted scientists that there had to be an intelligence behind the integrated complexity of the physical universe. The second was my own insight that the integrated complexity of life itself, which is far more complex than the physical universe, can only be explained in terms of an intelligent source. I believe that the origin of life and reproduction simply cannot be explained from a biological standpoint, despite the numerous efforts to do so. So here's a man who was not looking for faith, not looking for belief, in one sense not looking for God, but he said the last several decades of his life were this growing sense that there had to be a reason beyond just material causes. But probably the most important reason I believe in God of some source is this, and I put it this way. I believe in God. I believe God exists because I believe you exist. Let me explain what I mean by that. Lots of really, really intelligent people, when they think about those two possibilities of everything coming from someone or everything coming from something, everything coming from a personal source or everything coming from an impersonal source, they realize when they choose the impersonal, when they choose the material, what happens is a basis to say there is real personhood in human life goes away. And Richard Dawkins wrote this, which I completely agree with, at least in his view of it. We are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. This is a truth which still fills me with astonishment. That we're just robots, we're just machines. He understands that's where your thinking must go if you begin with the impersonal. William Provine from Cornell said, let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us loud and clear. There are no gods, no purposes, no goal-directed forces of any kind. There's no life after death, there's no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning to life, and no free will for humans either. No free will because chemistry doesn't have will. I know there's somebody there. If they die, and when they die, it will be more than a change in chemical reactions. Somebody is there. When I look into the eyes of my wife, somebody is there. I respect Spencer because I believe somebody is there. Somebody that goes beyond the chemical. I cannot believe we are only chemistry. And honestly, I don't think anybody can. There's a man, Jean-Paul Sartre. I've read a number of his writings. He, I would say, is the most famous atheist that comes to my mind when I think of the 20th century. French existentialist, profoundly vocal, atheistic writer, thinker, philosopher. He said this toward the end of his life. Profound statement from this man. I do not feel that I am the product of chance, a speck of dust in the universe, but someone who was expected, prepared, prefigured, in short, a being whom only a creator could put here. And this idea of a creating hand refers to God. This is Jean-Paul Sartre. He could not look at his own humanity and end with the thought that he was only chemistry. Somebody, something personal made us because personhood must come from something with personhood. I am utterly convinced of that point. And I think it's so interesting that Antony Flew, the man I spoke of earlier, also said this as his point of believing in God. Another relatively recent change in my philosophical views is my affirmation of the freedom of the will. Antony Flew found a basis for his humanity in his belief in a God. I respect you because you are someone from someone. Your personhood and your humanity is real. All right, how did I do? My timer stopped. Okay, 2 minutes. Great, I only got 2 minutes, 2 points, I can do it. Does God exist? God meaning the personal supreme being described in Genesis. Why would I say capital G, God is a God in Genesis? Well, I think there's a good reason to say that. 54% of the world's populations are part of the Abrahamic religions. In other words, they somehow attach their faith to the God of Abraham. And of course, the three primary ones would be Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, although there would be others. And I believe in that God, capital G, for several reasons. One is because of the supernatural evidence of prophecy. And Spencer may want to ask more about this. But as I've looked at that, I find a picture of the future spoken in author after author spanning centuries. And I go, there has to be a mind above all this to explain that. If I was God and I wanted to wave and I wanted to go, here I am, that's how I do it. I'd have author after author after author tell different parts of a story. And that's what I find in the Bible. The compelling power of the Bible to explain myself and the world. The only place I've ever found an explanation for the problem of evil that makes sense to me is in the Bible. The experience of guilt. Why do we feel bad about things? Where does that come from? The only place I've ever found that makes sense in telling me why that is the Bible. The human need for love and relationship. I only understand that in view of the Bible. As a matter of fact, I consistently feel like this book knows me. It's been an overwhelming thing over the years to read it and go, wow, it's just so amazing. This gets it. This is it. This describes it. And that's why I believe in the big G God. Well, what about the Christian God? That would be to believe in the Trinitarian God or the New Testament as a description of what God's done. I do believe in that, obviously, for really two primary reasons. One, how the life of Jesus completes the promise of God in the Old Testament. The Old Testament presents such an incredibly powerful beginning of a story. But without Jesus, the story just ends. God stops speaking about 400 BC, and the people of God are overwhelmed and conquered again and again, and the temple is destroyed, and the people are scattered, and it's like the story just stops nowhere. But if Jesus is God's reality, living in the world and bringing all of that story to a conclusion, it is incredibly powerful and is still going on today, and it all makes sense. And then the last thing would be evidence of the resurrection. And Spencer can maybe ask more about this. But for me, that's very, very powerful.
Anthony, you're out of time.
Thank you.
I don't have a timer, so you want to do that for me? Cool. Well, what'd y'all think? Convincing? So there was quite a few. I made a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm going to. Whoa, that's too close. I'm going to. You have the. Oh, it's right here. I'm going to, rather than use my PowerPoint, I'm just going to respond to some of the points that John raised, because like I said, I've never heard him state these things before. So if I get this thing to work. All right, so I'll just get right into it. There's quite a few fallacies that John appealed to when he was arguing. First of all, we need the question of the debate is, does the Christian God exist? And in the beginning, he was laying out different ideas of a God, like a deistic God, and then a personal God, and then specifically the Christian God. So those are different things. So to ask, for example, a bunch of students, do you believe in that all humans came from a God? That's quite a bit different from saying, do you believe that they come from the Christian God? So that wouldn't be evidence for belief in Christianity specifically. Another fallacy that I think John appealed to was when he was talking about, basically, this is the design argument, and I have a slide here. The design argument, it basically boils down to a God of the gaps argument, and that's when you say some biological feature of the world, like humans or a bird's wing or an eye, is so complex I can't explain it, therefore God did it. That's a leap of logic that John is unjustified to make, and that is what his entire argument boils down to. So the design argument fails for a number of reasons. First of all, it doesn't even demonstrate a single designer. If we look at the world around us, this idea is based on an inference to the best explanation. So if we look at the world around us and we look at fish, they have scales. We look at mammals and they have body hair, or we look at birds and they have feathers. We could make an inference that each one of those different kinds of animals has a different designer. Because when, like the argument goes, every building needs a builder, every painting needs a painter, every sculpture needs a sculptor, right? That's how the argument goes. Did the painter also build the building? No, there's different designers for different designs. So we could use that same logic and say that there's multiple designers. Another reason it fails is that if you don't know how something came to be, it doesn't demonstrate that the designer was supernatural. And intelligent design advocates will even admit this in their book. William Dembski admits this in his book, that the designer could have been some natural part of nature. It could have been an alien from another planet, right? There's no way to make the leap to supernatural designer. Even the first god that was on his list, he can't even make it that far. Another thing, it doesn't demonstrate that the designer or designers was also the creator of the entire universe, right? You could have a designer, but that's another leap to a creator. Another thing, it doesn't demonstrate that this designer was all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful, because that's what John claims the Christian God is, right? He's this omni-God with all these traits to the maximum. But if we look at the world around us, let me see if I can find this slide. I've had to mix these things up. Sorry about that. If we look at the world around us, I'll just go back. Every instance of design that we've ever seen has been imperfect. Every designer that has ever designed something has been flawed in some way and immoral in some way, right? Everyone who's ever painted a painting has been immoral in some way. Everyone who's ever designed a building has been flawed or has some feature of them that isn't perfect. So to make an inference to that the world needs the designer based on that background knowledge that we have, the only logical conclusion we can make is that this designer was incompetent, or wasn't all-knowing, I should say, and is not immoral, or is not morally perfect. So that's another shortcoming of this design argument. Another thing that I want to point out is that John appealed to quite a bit of what other people believe. He says 54% of the world believes in an Abrahamic faith. That does absolutely nothing to demonstrate the existence of the Christian God. It's an appeal it's an argument ad populum. It's an appeal to population. The world used to believe that the Earth was the center of the solar system. Does that prove that it's true? Probably not. The fact that people believe something isn't a justification that it's actually true. So all those arguments that he gave, that these people believe this or this, all these people with doctorate degrees believe in some kind of a God. First of all, it's not necessarily the Christian God. It could be like Anthony Flew, who was a deist, who did not believe in an afterlife, who didn't believe in Christianity. And you mentioned Einstein, too. Einstein was a pantheist. He didn't believe in a personal God. He thought that the physical world, the laws of nature, that just energy was God. It's just a different way of defining the word. But he was neither one of these guys were anywhere close to John. So the things that John believes, he's what you would call a young earth creationist. So he believes in the Christian God, but he also interprets the book of Genesis literally. So he thinks the earth and the universe are about 6,000 years old, that the first man came from the rib bone, or the first woman came from the rib bone of the first man, right? That there was this talking snake that apparently spoke in Hebrew. There was a worldwide flood and Noah took all these animals on an ark. That dinosaurs and humans lived at the same time. That's not scientific. So I think that's quite a leap that he's making. I think a lot of apologists will say these things like, I base what I believe on science, but I think when you come down to his epistemology, his methodology, his way of coming to know what he says is true, I think it's just flawed, and I think it's flawed at the very first step. So instead of arguing about the specifics of the facts, I mean, we could sit here all night and argue about whether or not there's evidence to support creationism. I want to go a step below that and discuss why John's way that he came to know that Christianity is true is probably an unreliable process. I think I'll be able to demonstrate this because even in his opening, he was referring to evidence from the world. We see evidence from animals, and you said genetic evidence and evidence from origins of life, even though there really isn't evidence of that. But he was pointing to scientific evidence as a way to inform his belief. But I don't think that's necessarily what he does when it comes to accepting his religious faith. You mentioned, let me go back and find it, you mentioned that you, where is it? It's part of this other page, that you, well, for one, you said you're absolutely settled without a shadow of a doubt that the Christian God exists. And I want to know how that level of certainty is justified. You also, let's see, I got all these notes. This is the first time I've ever heard him argue, so this is the first time I'm hearing it all. Well, maybe I'll leave it at that. I think I've covered his opening statement pretty well, and we'll get to more in the Q&A in the back and forth. But I think I'll leave it at that, and we'll continue on.
Are you taking your time?
How much time do I have left?
You have 7 minutes.
7?
7.5.
Oh wow. Okay.
Six.
Well, let's see. Sure. Okay. So I'll go through part of my slide. Let's see where I was at. Yeah, so, wow, I have 7 minutes left. So, see, I'm new to this. So I want to say that I have been mistaken before about things that I've believed. Big things, little things. I think the same would be true about most of you guys. The best way to discover that you've been mistaken about a belief is to, first of all, be open to the possibility that you could be mistaken. Next is to be willing to revise your beliefs if you find out that you are mistaken. And then thirdly is to be open to new evidence. Right? That seems to make sense. Some people are not even open to the possibility that they could be wrong. They're dogmatically certain in their beliefs, and they're fixed in what they think is true, and they're not even open to it. So, first of all, if you want to have a reliable way to come to know things, then first of all, you got to be open to the possibility that you could be wrong, because none of us are infallible. We're all infallible, right? And also, sometimes I'll hear Christians say, I'll be talking with them, and it'll get to a point where they'll say, if Christianity isn't true, then I don't want to know what is. So you also have to be willing to revise your beliefs if counter evidence is presented that is convincing that maybe you're wrong. And most importantly, you got to be open to evidence. If you think about something that you were wrong about in the past, maybe you believed in a conspiracy theory of some kind, or you believed in astrology, or maybe if you break a mirror, something bad is going to happen to you. Who knows? You believe in something that you later revised that belief. What was it that made you change your mind? It was probably some kind of evidence that somebody put forth, or some argument that they used. And I would call these steps, I would call it a belief correction procedure. And this is a methodology. This is a way of refining or correcting beliefs that we already hold. And if you want to believe things that are true, then this is the best way to do it. This process of thinking can be described in a philosophical way as this belief correction procedure. But it's really just critical thinking at a basic level. If you value evidence and you want to understand what's true, then this is the way to do it. And I think that this is what all of us do already all the time. Well, most of us at least. Maybe you know a few people who don't. But I think we do this all the time, and I think we should, I want to argue tonight that John should also do it, or all of us should do it when it comes to a God belief. So I already went over some of the things that John believes. Here's a quote from John from a sermon that I was able to find online. He says, "I'm not leaving church. I'm going the rest of my life. I'm old. That's what I do." So it says something about John's attitude, which he also stated in his opening about being absolutely convinced. Another thing John said is, knowledge of the world will only bring artificial things. Knowledge doesn't build, knowledge builds things that are empty. Some of you science majors in here might be going, what? That's what science and technology is all about, right? So, where does John get these ideas? The Bible. Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Proverbs 3:5-6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him and he will make your paths straight. Or 2 Corinthians 10:5, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. So we can kind of see where these ideas come from. Do not be conformed to this world, lean not on your own understanding, take captive every thought and make it obedient. Something else John said, be careful that no one takes you captive with hollow and deceptive philosophies that depend on human values and the basic principles of this world rather than on Christ. Well, you got to ask yourself, if this is John's attitude coming to this debate tonight, what possible evidence could I present him? What possible philosophical counter-argument would even get through to him if this is his attitude coming to the debate tonight? Every evidence that I could present is empty. Every philosophical counter-argument to a design argument or a cosmological argument, or I didn't know what he was going to present, but maybe a philosophical argument for the problem of evil. If he comes to it presupposing that anything I say is necessarily hollow and deceptive because it goes against his theological beliefs, then what are we doing here? Why is he even debating? Is he just evangelizing, or is he really open to questioning what he believes? And it goes back to having a reliable belief correction procedure that you have, a reliable methodology of coming to know what's true. So I want to know these things. What evidence could I present? What possible counter-arguments could I give? And also, how could John discover if he was mistaken? It's like, I've heard somebody say that this kind of thinking of being completely insulated in a belief is like taking a bridge out to an island and then burning the bridge once you get there. So you're just kind of stuck on this island with nowhere to go. And I don't think that kind of an epistemology, I want to argue, is unreliable. That kind of, the belief correction procedure that I had mentioned before, I think John's epistemology has neglected that. How much time? 1 minute? All right, so one more thing I just want to add is that why these beliefs matter. Obviously, yes, that's what we're talking about. Why does all this matter? Well, to quote Matt Dillahunty, I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. What better reason do you want than that? How many people in here want to believe as many false things as possible? There's usually one. Nobody, right? We want to believe things that are true. So my question, and what I want to kind of focus on tonight, is what is the best way, what is the most reliable way to come to know something? And what is that process? What is that thinking process? And how does it work in every other aspect of our lives? And does John use that process for his God belief? Thank you.
We now have 20 minutes of conversation and cross-examination.
Okay there. Yeah, I think you have to wait a second. I think it just came. So Spencer, I don't know where you want to start. You may want to ask me questions. Yeah, go ahead. That'd be
I
great.
got lots of them.
Okay, that's good.
Well, let's see. So maybe we'll start with the design argument. I mean, you're saying that your belief is based on the complexity of life. Like in this book right here that TomThePreacher.com was handing these out on campus, page 15, one of the things he says is that it's just too complex. Therefore, God must have done it. I think. Here we go. Maybe try to mess with that one. So, anyways, he's saying his reasoning is it's too complex. I cannot explain it. I don't understand it. Therefore, the God that I had already believed in is the reason why it exists. Do you think that's a logical way to reach a conclusion?
Oh, channel. Yeah, we might be having channel conflicts. Okay, so let me just make one statement beforehand. You quoted me on a number of times there, and I think the first quote about knowledge actually may have been from a sermon that you got to hear me share when you came to church last couple weeks ago. And then the other out of the sermon on Malachi. I am happy to have my beliefs challenged. But it's really important that you understand what they are when you challenge them. And the first one about knowledge, my sermon that Sunday was on love. And you know, one of the things I really have learned, this would be a Christian perspective, is that knowledge is not the ultimate way to accomplish good in the world. The Bible says that love is. And I was sharing how I feel like I've learned that in my own life. I can be really intellectually competitive. I'm pretty careful with things I study through. I think I have a pretty good epistemology. I think I fit what you described it there. But I can get pretty contentious and competitive. And I just really realized, that just really goes nowhere. You can look at the preachers outside and go, that just doesn't go anywhere. And so I'm saying that knowledge is not the end of where I want to end up. But Jesus was called the way, the truth, and the life. So truth is incredibly important from the Christian perspective. And so I will acknowledge your point that truth has to be the ultimate determiner in our epistemology. I'm just saying that for me, truth, I've learned, is not the final step in where I want to end up.
This one. So this one works. Did you come to understand that the Christian God exists, or is that your way of coming to know that the Christian God exists through love or through knowledge? So in other words,
let me go back to your original question about design, because that'll help. So you asked me about design.
Oh boy. How about this? You want to use that microphone up there, or you can use this one and I'll stand up?
Okay. Sorry. How about if I sit in your seat, you stand at the podium? Okay.
We just got to be far away from each other.
Maybe that's it. I wonder if that's it. Maybe it is conflict with the channels.
Yeah.
Okay. So you asked me about the design argument.
Yes.
And what was your question? Because I thought it was a good question.
So appealing to an argument from ignorance.
Yeah.
Saying, I don't know how this works, therefore God. Is that a logical way to reach a conclusion?
That's a great question. And here'd be my answer to that. So Antony Flew gave that answer. Hey, it's too complex. So why is that a valid answer? Well, it's a valid answer because of this. In science, what we look for is the most likely possibility as an explanation. It's Occam's razor. So we could say that the Grand Canyon was caused by birds coming and taking sand grains out and making the Grand Canyon, because that is possible. But we'd also go, but that is way less likely than the Colorado River making that. So we go, the scientific answer is the Colorado River did it. If we grant that it is possible there's an intelligence in the universe, if you grant that that's an existential possibility, then people like Antony Flew and lots of other people, including me, say the simplest answer is that an intelligence has organized these
So
systems.
you're just appealing to the same fallacy over again. There's so many things wrong with what you said. Occam's razor is not what you said it was. Occam's razor is when all things are equal, you prefer the explanation with the least number of assumptions attached to it. And also, science doesn't make conclusions based on arguments from ignorance. When science can't explain something, it doesn't go, well, let's just jump to what's possible. Science wants to know what's actual, right? Science wants to know what's most probable and what's actually true. And I will grant that some kind of a higher power, the first God that was on your list, maybe even the second one, could exist. Absolutely, it's a logical possibility. That just means that there's nothing logically incoherent about the concept itself. That doesn't mean that it's probably true or that it's actually true. You still need more evidence to make that conclusion. But I grant that it's possible that it's true, but a God of the gaps argument that's the oldest fallacy in the book.
So let me ask you this, Spencer. If we grant that it's possible that there's an intelligence that has put life together, how would we test and pursue that possibility?
Is this intelligence supernatural?
Well, actually, you are correct. That would not matter. Although, ultimately, it would matter. Well, it would matter. It would matter for me to continue my argument to the big G God and the Christian God. You're right. But at this level of we're looking at life, we're acknowledging there's a possibility and intelligence put it together, and now we're just going to try to test that. Let's say my hypothesis is that intelligence caused life. How can I test that hypothesis?
I don't know. You tell me. I mean, the problem with the intelligent design theory, which is it's intelligent design creationism. It's not even a scientific theory. It's just a hypothesis. The problem is that it lacks an epistemology. The people who say, anyone who says a supernatural agent caused this or that to happen, you lack a procedure to either confirm or disconfirm the cause, right? If you want to say that a supernatural agent caused something, you have no way to confirm or disconfirm it. It's just like a faith position. And I would add one more thing. Even if you could demonstrate that some intelligent agent of some kind, whether it be some super alien race or some mad scientist in another universe or a god of any one of the three that he listed,
Yeah, that's
or the first two that he listed, that still wouldn't justify John's Christian God belief, right? So he has another
That's
leap
true.
that and mostly when apologists argue
And you
this,
make a great point there. Yeah, that's true.
they say the universe had a cause, or life requires a designer. Therefore, the Bible, you just made a massive leap there that's unjustified.
Huge leap. So that's why when I think it through, and as we talked earlier a few days ago, I didn't become a Christian through this logic. I became a Christian for, it's hard to know why, because my mom taught me to pray when I was a kid, because whatever. But because once I became a Christian, I just...
Was that God or was that you, Forrest?
It was the voice of God, actually.
Okay, did you fix something for us?
Yeah, we got it all fixed for you.
Okay. So anyway, there were lots of questions I had to answer after I became a Christian because there's a lot of voices out there saying none of this is true. So for me, I go back and go, well, is there anybody there at all? That's the first thing you got to say, is there anybody there at all? Then once you have a reason to believe, yeah, there's somebody there, then who is it? And for me, I get to who is it because I feel like I have evidence that someone has spoken in the Bible. Okay, he's spoken in the Bible, so then what did he do? And I find evidence that, he did something in the person of Jesus.
So how do you know that the Bible, you said first of all, I want to ask, if there was a scale from 0 to 100, 0 being no God belief and 100 being 100% certain that the Christian God exists, where would you be on that scale?
You quoted me in your summary there. I made that statement where there's absolutely no question in my mind left. That's at the little G God. I'm just so certain in my own mind that there's an intelligence behind life. But I would say the same thing about the Christian God. And the reason I would say that is really because of what I shared, the evidence for the resurrection and the way the life and death and resurrection of Jesus completes the story of the Old Testament. Those are beyond coincidental things for me. It has got to be divine.
I could respond to the argument from prophecy. We could go down that path. But I want to ask, if you had been raised in a Muslim-dominated culture or a Hindu-dominated culture, or you heard preachings about Krishna or Vishnu or karma or reincarnation or something, would you be up here debating those topics with respect to those ideas?
Well, I might not be a Christian. That's really true. But it would not change the fact that there's still all this evidence for a designer, that there's all this prophetic evidence for a supernatural voice in the Bible, and that there's all this evidence for the resurrection of Christ. I might be ignorant of all that. I might not know any of it, but it wouldn't change the fact that it still exists.
But you would be saying that about the Quran. You'd be saying the Quran has been revealed from Allah, and you would say the Bible is partly supported about the Quran. You have a different perspective.
There are no other religions that are so obsessed with apologetics as Christianity. No one sets out to prove the Hindu religion. No one sets out to prove the Buddhist religion. There are some effort to provide some degree of apologetics for the Muslim religion, but primarily it's Christians that are obsessed with proving their religion. And the reason for that is, I think there's many, but one of them is because there are so many claims that can't be verified. There is no prophecy in the Quran. You can't go and say, well, the Quran is proven because of prophecy, because there isn't any prophecy in it. The Bible.
Some Muslims might disagree with that.
Well, I've studied that fairly thoroughly, and I do understand the extent of the claims there. But if I was a Muslim trying to prove the Muslim faith, I would be sharing. I would not have things that would lead me to as tight of a logical, rational argument as that I can have as a Christian.
Well, I wouldn't say it's very logical or rational given the arguments that you've given thus far. But I want to ask, what was one thing that you've been wrong about in your life?
Well, there's certain theological positions that over time I've changed.
Maybe I should specify. Something you were wrong about that has nothing to do with religion.
I mean, in terms of views?
Just any belief that you held?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can name a number of beliefs. I used to be a pro-abortion. I feel like I was wrong about that view. I used to have views on the uses of illegal drugs. I feel like I was wrong about that view. And so there, I know you're fishing for something, and I'm not saying fishing. I know you're looking for something a little bit different. Different political views. I certainly changed views on things.
So would you agree that the most reliable way to come to a belief that is most likely true is through a methodology that is open to belief revision and open to new evidence?
I thought your points were great, awesome. Open to the possibility of something different, willingness to revise your belief, open to new evidence. Those are awesome.
So what kind of evidence could be presented to you that would cause you to revise your God belief?
There will be tons, because Christianity makes so many claims. So there's all these archaeological claims that the Old Testament and the New Testament make. But the track record for both the Old and the New Testament is incredibly good in its archaeological claims.
Can you give an example of a piece of evidence that would cause you to revise your belief?
Yeah, if the Old Testament talked about all these towns and cities that don't exist, which would be what would exist for Mormonism. Many claims about historical events that occurred in South America, but we don't find archaeological evidence for that. So you can go and check it out and go, it's not there. But with Christianity, it's like boom, 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 boom. And every time there's a claim that the Bible is wrong, like up until 1906, one of the great evidences that the Bible was just a bunch of stories was that the Bible kept talking about the Hittites. From Abraham all the way through the prophets, these people, the Hittites, but everybody knew the Hittites didn't exist, and so the Bible is just another bunch of fables. And right there I go, what an incredible bias. All these authors in this ancient book are all talking about this people group, but somehow, because we don't have evidence for the people group, everyone assumes it's not true. Why would all these authors over all these centuries talk about this people group? Now we know that the Hittite kingdom was as large as the Egyptian kingdom and one of the predominant kingdoms in the whole ancient world. So the Bible was assumed to be wrong, assumed to be false, assumed to be stories, and yet it was exactly right about a huge truth of ancient history. And that's happened again and again. Like it used to be claimed, well, David never existed. David never existed. The central figure of the Jewish religion never existed, but because there wasn't other extra biblical evidence, archaeologists said, well, the Bible's just a bunch of stories talking about David. Well, of course, now they found evidence for David. The same thing was Pontius Pilate. Every time there's not evidence outside of the Bible, the frame of reference tends to be, well, the Bible's just stories, it's not true. And then archaeology discovers the evidence for it. And so I go, there's an amazing track record archaeologically. But if there wasn't, I'd go, eesh, that's be a reason to think maybe this isn't true.
So it sounds like quite a bit of what you believe is based on what you see as evidence supporting the Bible.
Right.
If we were to make a pie chart and it had evidence and it had faith, what would that pie chart look like if you were to kind of differentiate between how you came to your God belief and belief that the Bible is true? How much of it is justified by evidence, and how much of it is faith?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I think my view of faith has changed over time. I think when I became a Christian as a freshman in college, it was almost all faith and no evidence. Now, the specifics of my belief are largely evidence. And I think what God wants in faith is not faith that he exists blindly. I don't think that if there is a God, that certainly doesn't honor him. But what he wants is faith in his character. He wants, like, if you believed in me, or I believed in you, it doesn't mean I believe you exist, but it means I believe in you. I trust you, which I do. I think you're a man of integrity. And so I believe in you. I think God wants the same thing from us. It's not so much that we blindly believe he exists, but once knowing he exists, we trust him. And that's what I think is the faith he wants.
Could you define that word faith? What do you mean by that?
It's a relational trust. It's the same trust we have in one another. So God makes certain promises to us. He says, hey, if you walk the way I want you to walk, your life will go better. And a lot of people might say that to us. Hey, do what I say and things will go better. And I have to decide whether I'm going to apply faith in that person and trust them.
Well, would you use the biblical definition in Hebrews 11:1 that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously,
So
I
when you compare, then what you're comparing is actually two different things. If you, like saying I have trust in my friends and people that I know, I have evidence that they exist. It's things that I can see, things that I can verify to anyone who asks. There's a video recording of this event right now. If anyone wants to know about our relationship and that you actually exist, I can provide them with verifiable evidence. But when it comes to the God belief in the Bible and the definition of faith, which is different from a warranted trust, is belief in things that are unseen. So those are two different things, aren't they?
Well, so God promises me that if I believe in Jesus and believe what the Creator did through him, I will go to heaven. I've never seen heaven.
That's the
Heaven is
theological
unseen.
claim.
Yes.
That's the theological claim that you believe in.
Yes,
The
it is
way that
unseen.
the way that you justify that, the way that you come to know it,
Well,
is through faith.
I can
through
never,
certain
I can never
unseen.
prove I'm going to heaven. I have to believe God. He said it. I can verify.
Why do you have to?
Well, I'm just saying, if I'm going to believe in heaven, I have to believe in that by faith. I've never been there. No one's ever showed it to me.
And that's the unseen, the blind faith.
Yeah, That's like if you told me, hey, John, meet me tomorrow and I'll buy you dinner. I go and meet me here and I show up there. Well, the reason you've never bought me dinner before, and I've never been to that restaurant before, and I have to apply faith. I show up and you're there and you buy me dinner. I apply faith in it, but I've never seen it.
That's more like the warranted trust, right? Based on
that's what I've known you
for a while,
guys.
and I'm probably the kind of guy that'll show up to a dinner and not
Absolutely.
just stay. So that's different than blind faith. That's a trust based on knowledge.
Well, I wouldn't say that my belief in heaven is blind faith. I'm saying I believe God has demonstrated faithfulness in lots of different ways that I can verify. And because he's demonstrated faith in lots of ways I can verify, what he says, I made you to be with me forever, and if you follow me, I will have you be with me forever. I believe he's trustworthy because of other things that he's done.
So if your way of coming to know in this God belief and in these God's promises and in the afterlife if your way of coming to know that is through a process of a blind faith to some extent, then how can you be justified to be at the 100% conviction on your belief? How is that justified?
Okay, believing in God is different than, okay, so Jesus said, whoever believes in him will have eternal life. Now, there's a lot I don't know about eternal life. There's a lot I would have to conjecture about with eternal life. Jesus himself didn't tell us a lot about what that even, what heaven's like. So I believe in that. There's a lot of trust there. But believing that Jesus rose from the dead, I feel like logic tells me it's far more likely that he did than that he didn't.
But far more likely is different from I'm justified 100%. So I'm asking,
That's true.
How is the 100% certainty justified if your method of coming to know it is through an unreliable process?
Yeah, okay, I'll grant that. I wouldn't say I'm 100% sure. I would say that of the two possibilities, this now seems to be the reasonable, rational choice of belief, but I couldn't be 100% certain of that.
What if instead of a non-Christian up here on stage debating against you, it was somebody else of a different theistic faith, and they were saying that how they came to know it was through this process of the book says it, I believe it, and I believe in all the promises that are in this book. Like they see the claim and they also use that as the evidence for the claim. And then they use the process of faith, this blind faith, and they say what I believe is true for me and true for everybody, because that's what you believe. You believe it's not just a subjective feeling that you have. You think this is actually true. Yeah. What would you say? I mean, what can you say against someone who has the same methodology that you do, yet of a different conclusion? How do you settle that contradictory truth?
I mean, like if a Muslim was here pointing at the Quran.
Or if there's a Muslim and a Hindu and a Zoroastrian and a Jew, and the list goes down of all these different faith positions that people can hold, how is yours more justified than anyone else's?
Well, that again is a great question, and I would just say this, Spencer, and that's why I enjoy doing this with you. There is some reality. There is some reality beyond our lives. There's some reality bigger than me that I'm going to experience. Maybe William Provine's right, and I'm going to die, and my chemistry is just going to change, and there's nothing. But there is a reality after me. Every one of us is responsible to figure that out. There's a claim of eternity. There's a claim you have an eternal soul. That claim is...
All right, time actually.
We're at time?
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
We're actually like 2 minutes over because I accounted for like our mics going crazy.
Okay.
So
and maybe somebody else will ask it.
So yeah, questions. Don't forget about those question cards. And Spencer, you have 5 minutes for your closing
Oh wow, okay, cool. You guys heard it here. Blind faith and God of the gaps arguments. And no real way to distinguish between a faith of one religion and a faith of another. The way I kind of see it is that John's belief is subjective. It is believed by him and maybe other people in his community. And I want to point out that I don't doubt for a second that he genuinely believes it, and other people who go to his church who also believe it, and that they're good people. John's a super nice guy, and that the community that he lives with and is involved with they do good things. So there is, even if his belief turns out to be not true, it's still useful in a way, at least at the community level, and I'll grant that right away. But I think that some of it might be, the question I was going to ask following was, if his belief is based on a kind of a fear, if he hears about these stories in the Bible, I mean, the eternal punishment, and I mean, there's quite a few pretty horrific claims about unbelievers in the Bible. Is his belief motivated in any way by fear? And if it is that another? I mean, is that kind of a motivation? Is that a sign of a good reason to believe? But other than that, I think the design argument that he put forth about the complexity of life, it's just a fallacy. It's just saying, I can't understand something, it's too complex for me to understand, therefore fill in the blank. It's not a justification for anything supernatural, even a creator, or especially the Christian God. So if the question tonight is, does the Christian God exist? I think John hasn't been able to establish that it does. I think he's been able to establish that he believes it personally, subjectively, and with an unreliable process, an unreliable epistemology, one that uses a kind of a blind faith, when about the belief correction procedure that I had mentioned before, you usually are open to new evidence, and argument is what changes your mind. But if you have a blind faith, then you can't see the evidence, and I think it's wholly unreliable. Other than that, maybe I'll say something about the morality of William Provine that you had mentioned in one of your slides. William Provine was a biology professor, or the history of biology, I think. He's not a moral philosopher. I think he is an atheist, but he doesn't represent a secular moral philosophy in the way that I would say that I believe in morality and have a moral system. I think that there are moral facts in the world, and maybe if we continue these events, maybe next semester we can talk about morality. You guys can offer ideas of what you want to hear us debate and turn it in as you leave. That'd be awesome. But maybe we could discuss morality. But I would just want to say one thing. Even if the Christian God doesn't exist, maybe you believe it, maybe you don't, but even if the Christian God doesn't exist, and you come to realize that, and you revise your belief, are you going to suddenly go out and start harming people for fun? Would you start stealing because you feel like it? Would you kill someone for whatever reason? I don't think so. I think every one of you is a decent human being, and even if you change your belief, you're still going to have a sense of morality, and you're still going to be a good person. And I think you may even improve your epistemology. You may even improve your way of coming to know something and in a way that is more likely to lead you to true beliefs. So, as Matt Dillahunty said up there, I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible, and I hope that's true for everyone else here. Thank you.
All right, come on, you have 5 minutes.
Maybe it's my age, but one of my favorite scientists was Carl Sagan. Actually, Carl Sagan and I didn't agree on hardly anything, probably, but I loved his awe and wonder at the world. And he said this. He said, you have to be made out of wood not to be interested in knowing whether we're alone in the universe. Wouldn't we be ashamed of ourselves if the answer was there for the taking and we were too shy to look? Of course, he was talking about, he was talking about E.T. and extraterrestrials, of course. But I have this picture in my mind of we suddenly find an extraterrestrial, or they find us, and we see them approaching in their spaceship, and they get out of their spaceship, and of course they're always way more intelligent than we are, and they have this special machine where they've already read our minds and they can speak our language, and so they walk up to us and they have their communication machine, and we get ready for this intense moment where we're just about to have our first communication with life from outer space. And this massively intelligent being looks at us and says, have you found the answer? Are we alone? I don't think finding life on another planet is going to answer that question that is in our heart, or that was in Carl Sagan's heart. And if there was a Muslim and a Hindu and a Buddhist and an atheist and an agnostic and a Christian sitting on this podium, I'd say, wow, awesome that you are seeking what is true about the world. Because all of us are going to enter into a reality that we don't change by what we believe. We just enter what's there
And if there is a God, we must trust that he has told us enough that if we're honest and humble, we can find the truth. I really believe there is a God that loves us, that made every person to be with him. In the Christian vernacular, we all, and sometimes this is even a negative word in our world, but we all have a Father, a perfect Father. And that perfect Father has made every one of us and knows us. Didn't make us en masse, he made you. And he knows you. And he wants and likes you. God only makes the people he likes. If he doesn't like them, he doesn't make them. If you're here, I believe he likes you. And he wants you to seek and find him. And God entered this world in Jesus. And if we look, that's what we discover. And it's not bad. People are so afraid of that. Why be afraid of being loved and finding what all of our hearts were made for? And I think that's what there's there that I've found in Christianity and in Jesus.
All right, so I hope you guys have been fairly entertained so far tonight. Can we get another round of applause for both of them? So we're going to take a 3-minute break. I saw a lot of you already gave Eric, my lovely assistant, your question cards. If you have more questions, we should have more index cards at the Secular Student Alliance table. So 3-minute break, take a potty break, write some more questions. We'll be back here in 3 minutes, and we'll do some Q&A. Thank you. Yeah, I think we got them working for you. It seems to be working pretty well towards the end. That's not. Spencer, you want to test yourself?
You.
All right, Brad. All right, so we have 30 minutes scheduled for Q&A, which is a good thing because it looks like we have a lot of them. And the first one seems to be made out to both of you guys. How would you react if after you die, you find out your beliefs are wrong? We'll start with John.
Well, that of course depends on how I'm wrong. If I'm wrong that there isn't any God, then I won't have any reaction. But there could be a God and I could be wrong about other things. And I guess whatever it is, that's what I'm going to have to live with. See, I believe I'll live with it forever. That's why, for me, these are really important questions.
I would, too, be, it depends what I was wrong about, but if I were to suddenly find myself standing in front of the pearly gates and Jesus, and the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are there, I would be absolutely floored. I would be completely shocked, and I would want to know, where did I go wrong? What did I miss? I've tried to reason my way through this. I've tried to. The amount of suffering in the world, like malaria. Why does malaria exist? Childhood cancer, tsunami waves, earthquakes. If you're a loving God and you're all powerful, why is the world the way that it is? It seems like you didn't exist. And I would just want to know where I went wrong.
All right, Spencer, nice ones for you as well. What evidence would it take for you to become a Christian?
People ask me this question a lot. Well, I don't want to dodge the question, but I think if there really is a God who is all-knowing and all-powerful, then he would know my thoughts. He would know me better than I do. He would know me better than anyone in the world would know me. And he would know exactly what it would take for me to come to believe that he exists. And if he's powerful enough to do that, then maybe I'm one of the reprobate. I don't know. I've never had an experience with a God. I feel like I'm open to it. But when it comes to the Christian God, there's so many things wrong. I mean, the stories in the Bible, we didn't really get to like the factual questions about it. But I mean, Adam and Eve, and the rib woman, and the talking snake, and the flood of Noah, and the dude living in the belly of a big fish for 3 days. I mean, are you kidding me? It's not something that I think is reasonable to believe. So I think it would take It would take a miracle.
All right, and John, this one's for you. If God loves all his children unequivocally, how can you kind of reconcile that with the idea of hell?
Well, I believe God created every soul. I think that's what the Bible says, that we are all loved by him. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. However, I also do believe there's two other profound truths there. One is God has made us in his image, and as being in his image, we are relational creatures. We must make a relational choice. In Jesus, God removed every obstacle. There's absolutely nothing between him and you anymore. It was all taken away in Christ. He said, every issue I've got, I took care of it. I'm done. I'm good with you. I'm good with you. But just like a man can go up and propose to a woman, hey, I really want to marry you, the woman still has to say, okay. And God walks up to every one of us, and I wrestled with this a long time, and part of me went, wow, God, that'd be really cool. And then the other part of me went, I don't want somebody bigger than me in my life. I'll think, well, things are going to have to change. I don't want somebody running my life. And this incredible tension. And every one of us makes a profound relational choice. Do you want to belong, or do you want to be God in your own life? And I think God puts that relational choice in front of every person, and I believe we get to make it freely. You get to make a free relational choice. And the other reality is, every one of us were created to be like God. We were created to be perfect, and every one of us has failed. And every one of us has brought horrible things into this world that God intended to be perfect, and we brought them in. And because it's God's world, he's responsible for it. And if he doesn't judge those things, he's a bad, wicked God. He's responsible. Like anybody that makes something, if you make something, you're responsible for what that thing does. You made it, you're responsible for what it does. God made you, he's responsible for what you do. You have done evil. You know that. You were created to be perfect. You sense that. We sense we were created to be wonderful. I was created to be amazing. I'm supposed to be courageous and compassionate and all these wonderful things, and I'm not, but I want to be. I have brought evil into God's world, and he's got to judge it or he's not good. He will forgive me in Christ if I make the relational choice, but if I don't make that relational choice, then his only other option is he must bring goodness back into his world by judging the one who brought the evil, and that's me. And that judgment is hell.
All right, Spencer. Let's see. Someone asked, you seem to assume that we can only know things or justify our knowledge of things through evidence. How do you justify that?
The question is, I seem to be implying that we can only we can only know things through evidence?
Through evidence. I'm assuming they mean something scientifically or in terms of what we can observe with our senses.
Well, I mean, yeah, what we observe through our senses is based on evidence through our senses. But if you're just talking about knowledge in general, so is it about scientific knowledge, or is it about just any kind of knowledge?
I think they're asking you specifically a priori, so because they reference planning and properly basic beliefs.
Oh, right. So there are a priori beliefs that we have, maybe such as things as mathematics. You don't justify math through the senses, through the empirical world. It's kind of like an a priori, like before. It's a necessary truth. There are certain truths that we know which we do not come to discover through science or through some empirical method. But the things that Plantinga lists as properly basic beliefs, things like we believe things like such as our memory is reliable, or our senses are at least provisionally reliable. That there is an external world, that we're not just some brain plugged up to a matrix. We have beliefs that we hold that we can't actually justify. And I wouldn't say that we know that those are true in the sense that we have empirical scientific knowledge, because they're just properly basic beliefs. They're pre-rational beliefs. They're what you need to believe in order to be rational about the world around you in the first place. And a lot of people don't give these beliefs, these properly basic beliefs, a lot of thought. They just go through their lives assuming that they're true. But there are beliefs that we hold. I wouldn't say that we know them in terms of what planning and the philosophical foundational beliefs that we hold, but there are other a priori truths that, it depends what you mean by know, but certain mathematical truths, logical truths, that sure we can say that we know. But I don't think all knowledge is through, I'm not an empiricist, I'm not a strict empiricist. I don't think all knowledge comes through science. I'm not like a, scientism, as they say. I'm not, one of those guys.
And John, this one's for you. Based on 21st century science, how can you justify a belief in young Earth creationism?
Okay, wow, that's a question with a long, long answer. And let me just
Good thing
say
we have 30
this.
minutes.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate that the challenge of that question. The notion that the Earth could actually be young, or the universe could actually be young, is so out of sync with what we commonly hear that it's really hard to believe that there could even be any scientific claim in that direction. All I want to say is, when I began investigating that question, I discovered that there are lots and lots of things that fit a young Earth framework in the realm of science. And I talk about those things quite a bit. I do a number of lectures on those, and I think there's also a great deal of evidence for the flood of Noah. And I'm going to do a 6-week class on that very subject starting a week from now. So if you're a person that believes in the Bible, but you go, but gee, I certainly don't believe that because it isn't true, I just want to let you know that there are things that you can look at, you can make your own decision about it, but there are things that will surprise you. They will surprise you, just like they surprised me. And I feel real peaceful and confident about the belief that just the way a 10-year-old would read the Bible, you hand the Bible to a 10-year-old and he'll go, well, let's see, God made the world in 6 days, and there was this talking snake, and Eve came out of Adam's rib, and there was this big flood with the giraffe sticking his head out of the ark. I think that's our history. And I have reasons for thinking that. But if that's surprising, it should be.
All right, this question's for both of you. It was kind of like one of the main topics for tonight. Why does it matter if the Christian God exists or if any God exists?
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. Maybe I can pull out this book that they hand out outside when they do their evangelism. It's not the pages aren't numbered, but it's a calendar. So on the November 1st day, it says, and I quote. Let's see, where does it start? A biblical worldview acknowledges that God made everything. And it goes on to say, there's an understanding that the world was made for our enjoyment. The idea that global warming or climate change is some sort of crisis to be prevented shows an incredible ignorance of true world history. That's why it matters. Because if you think that there's a God that is controlling the atmosphere, and there really isn't, and we're just pumping out millions and millions of tons, billions of tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere every year. I mean, the globe burns something like 90 to 100 million barrels of oil every single day. If you were to get in a car and drive straight up, in an hour you would be in outer space. That's how thin the atmosphere is. There's over 7 billion people on the planet. We burn 100 billion barrels of oil every single day, and the atmosphere is really, really thin. If there isn't a God that is controlling the atmosphere, then beliefs like this represent the human race walking blindfolded off a cliff to our demise. We're going to completely destroy the environment that we depend on. There's other reasons why it exists. I mean, some of the main proponents of people who are against marriage equality are coming from the religious right. They're trying to deny equal rights to certain people solely based on their sexual orientation. It doesn't harm anybody. Being gay is, number one, it's natural. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with being gay. It doesn't harm anybody. the only reason people object to it is because, well, they either think the government shouldn't be involved in marriage in the first place, or that the Bible says this, therefore it's an abomination. Well, your Bible's wrong. There's nothing wrong with being gay. So there's a lot of societal reasons and just survival reasons, sustainable reasons. And I think John's group and this book represents one of the most dangerous reasons why religious faith and a certainty that it's true when I don't think he has a reliable way of knowing that it's true. It just represents a danger that faces all of us.
And the question is, why does it matter if God exists?
Yes. Why does it matter if a Christian God exists or if any God exists?
Okay. Maybe I'll just go with the any God part, and then the Christian would be part of that. If we go to the personal and the impersonal, did we come from someone or something? If we came from someone, then there's a really good chance that there's a purpose for human life. Wow, just think about that. That there is a purpose that you stepped into that's there ahead of you. There's something about being human that's already defined. Somebody made human life to be something, to represent something, to express something, to do something. There's a purpose we were designed for. If that's true, then nothing would be more important to human flourishing than to know what is that design, what is that purpose. If there is no purpose, if there is no God, if we come from something, then we're not going to find a purpose. William Probine's right. There is no purpose, and so then it's just okay. So whatever seems to be the best thing at the moment. There is nothing There's nothing ahead of me, as John Paul Sartre said. He said he felt like he had been anticipated. He had been expected. You were not expected if you didn't come from someone. And so those two different courses in life, wow, there's a purpose. I gotta figure out what is that purpose for human life? What did anticipate me? Or I'm here alone. Just whatever. That doesn't mean I have to be evil or bad or shoot people, just like Spencer said. I can believe there is no God, and that isn't going to make me go steal somebody's car. As a matter of fact, I might believe very much that it's very important that we don't steal one another's cars if I don't believe in God, because we have to make this work together. So there is what Provine would have called a proximate basis for morals and ethics without any God. But we come up with it. It's not there ahead of us.
All right, Spencer, next question is for you. If all people are flawed, then what is your basis for trusting humanity or scientific knowledge?
I would say a number of things. Number one, it's all we got. I think it's all we have reason to believe that we have is our own ability to think, our own ability to understand the world around us. And I think science and technology are the fruits of people working very hard, being very disciplined, and valuing things like human curiosity and empirical evidence and progress. Progress is really hard to have happen, but our society has progressed tremendously. I mean, just within the last few centuries, life expectancy has doubled. We've eradicated many diseases, like measles and malaria are kind of coming back, but I don't want to go into that anti-vaccine thing, but maybe something like smallpox. Smallpox killed something like 500 million people. We've eradicated smallpox because of human knowledge. I mean, did a God have to exist for us to do that? Well, not really. I mean, we can just look at the evidence and study it and come to an understanding of the world. We don't have to be infallible to be able to do that. And if we look at the history of humanity, I mean, we've believed throughout human history, even if you think the Earth is only 6,000 years old, if you go back through what the metaphysical beliefs that people have held for the last 6,000 years, there's been all kinds of crazy stuff. Polytheism and gods with, people with animal heads and Egyptian gods, and you just go through the list of wacky things that people have believed. We're not perfect, but we're making progress, and it goes back to what I was saying about having a reliable epistemology. Having a belief correction procedure in place that is reliable, a common sense way of thinking, of analyzing evidence, of being open to being wrong, that's what science is all about. And that's what we got to do, given that we are fallible creatures. That's the best way to make the world a better place and to raise the conditions of living for everybody and to promote the most well-being around the world. We got a lot of work to do, and this is kind of a place to start, to talk about what we believe and why and the consequences of our beliefs.
All right, John, the next question is for you. What does God say about homosexuality?
Well, that goes back actually to the last question, or my answer to the last question anyway, on is there a design? Is there a purpose? Is there something that we have been prefigured for? And so for me, I go back to Genesis chapter 1, where we're told about our origin. Where do we come from? And then we're told that we're made in the image of God. We're different than every other thing that's been created. And as you walk through Genesis chapter 1 and really study how it unfolds the creation, we are profoundly different than the rest of the creation. Our source is God. Our identification is God. We don't, if you want to find out who you are, according to the Bible, you don't look down at the creation, you look up at God. That's how you figure out who you are. And it says we're made in the image of God, and it only told us one thing about what was contained or part of that. And it says that we are made male and female. The only thing we're told about the image of God is that somehow it exists in gender. God could have made us any way he wanted. He could have created anything he wanted. He said, I'm going to make my image. I'm going to make a picture of me. Here's a picture of me right here. Boom. And he said, let us make man in our image. In the image of God, he made him, male and female, he made them. The us in God is the them in the male and female. God said he put part of his own nature, part of the expression of what exists within the Trinity, in what is male and masculine and what is female and feminine. And then he said, and the completion of the picture of us is going to be them united together in a permanent physical covenant relationship. And that is the picture of us. And so at the end of Genesis chapter 2, when God brought the woman to the man, and the man said, this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. And God said, it is very good. And the image of the triune creator came together, two but one. And gender is tied to the image of the triune God. That is the Christian foundation for morality. And any use of sexuality outside of that man-woman covenant bond that represents God himself, God says any use of that outside of that bond misses its purpose. And in that description, every single one of us is condemned. Because every single one of us has failed in the picture for sexuality that God created. Jesus said, if you look upon a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. That's what you wanted. You've stepped out of the picture. The picture's so amazing. The picture's so beautiful. And you miss it, and you miss it, and you miss it, and you miss it. But this is what I created. Homosexuality is just one homosexual activity. It's just one more place we miss what the Bible said gender was created for and sexuality was created for. It's about a picture of God and perfect love. And that's the foundation for Christian morality in every measure, and every one of us stands condemned. But we still should say it's a beautiful picture I am called to.
All right, so the next question was directed at Spencer, but I think it'd be interesting to hear both your takes on it. Let's start with Spencer and then we'll go to John. Does science require a similar measure of faith to accept as a reliable means of knowing things? Is the science require faith as well, in the same way as religion requires faith?
It depends how you define the word faith, but if we go back to what you had mentioned before, this idea of these foundational philosophical beliefs, what some philosophers call properly basic beliefs. They're the grounding of everything we do in the world. You first have to assume that an external world exists in order to investigate anything about it. You have to assume that your memory is reliable. You have to assume that your senses work. All these assumptions are basic beliefs that everyone already assumes. So if you want to say that, well, and this is what science is based on, we have to believe these things, we have to assume these things without justification in order to do science. And I'm perfectly fine with saying that. I mean, there's no worldview, no Christianity is no better at justifying or providing a justification for these beliefs. So if you want to say that these properly basic beliefs are based on faith, then sure. I mean, there are certain things you have to believe that are unjustified to do science, but nobody can escape that. So the kind of faith that I was talking about with John's belief in evidence of the world and evidence that there's this God, it's not, according to the way he presents it, it's not an a priori belief, it's a conclusion based on evidence. So when he uses blind faith in that way, then that's totally different. That's like that's a different kind of a faith. That's not necessary. There's no reason, there's no philosophical or epistemological reason why that needs to be believed other than John's experiences, and John, has his reasons. But that's different from the properly basic beliefs that science is based on. So there is a distinction to be made.
I'd probably just try to simply say, I think science in its pure objective essence probably is based more on probabilities. We have certain ideas about the cosmos, about planets, or about cells, or whatever, based on data we have, and we go, okay, based on what we know now, this seems like the most likely explanation of that. We get more data, sometimes we change that. Okay, well, that's turned out now the data we have really indicates it's more like this. So science changes, coming up with explanations based on what's the most likely given what we know at the present moment. I'm not sure, Spencer, how you define blind faith, and maybe it does, maybe your definition would fit me. I would not want to apply that term to myself in my own definition of it. I don't think I have blind faith. I don't think God wants anyone to have blind faith. I don't think God would be honored by blind faith. But I think it's faith in God's character. He's a person. He said, hey, I will do this for you. I will do that for you. And we go, I'll believe you. I'll trust you. I'll have faith in you. And that's how I would see the difference between those two.
All right, John, next question's for you as well. And it kind of ties into what Spencer said earlier in the Q&A when I said it would take a miracle for him to believe. And the question is, why is God the use word hiding now? Why don't we see these miracles? Why don't we see kind of biblical events?
And I think that's a great question. Because if there really is a God who wants us to know him and he's really there, it would seem like it wouldn't be that hard for him to make his reality fairly clear. And so I think that is a real valid question. And of course, the Christian answer is, at one point, God is going to make his reality completely clear, and at that point, everybody's decisions are over. But why don't we get more evidence now? And the answer the Bible gives us, even though that answer doesn't necessarily seem to resonate with how we would define life, the answer the Bible gives is that we all have plenty of evidence. That what clogs up the works is our own reticence to allow God into our world. In other words, if we look for him, we'll find him. But we don't look and we don't want to find. That's what the Bible says. And so the challenge would be, can I say in my heart, I have really examined this question. I have really pursued it. I have really tried to find out, and I can't figure it out. And if you're right, then the Bible is wrong in that claim. But I'm just telling you from my own experience and from talking to lots of people, we can think we're way more open-minded than we really are.
All right, Spencer, we got a couple questions like this. They want you to make your case for atheism more clear rather than agnosticism, or just providing a positive argument for atheism.
Well, the topic of the debate tonight was, does the Christian God exist and why does it matter? If you want to do another debate on, is naturalism true or is metaphysical naturalism true, I would be happy to have the debate. But I think the position I'm trying to defend tonight is that there is no good reason to believe that the Christian God exists. And if I'm able to successfully do that, or undermine John's epistemology or his way that he came to know it, or show some flaws in his reasoning how he got there, then I think I've been successful in being able to argue the negative. But if somebody just wants to know, there are quite a few reasons. One that you just touched on was the problem of the hiddenness of God, or the problem of reasonable unbelief. There are people out there that really, really want to believe that a God exists, or even the Christian God, but they just can't find that. They just don't find that the evidence adds up. So they're not like resisting it, like you would say. They're actively seeking it. Yet, and even it says in 1 Timothy 2 that God wants everyone to come to a knowledge of the truth and to be saved, right? But not everyone has the knowledge of the truth, and no, not everyone is saved. So there is an inconsistency within the worldview, which is evidence against it. There's lots of other reasons. I mean, I could give internal inconsistencies within Christian theology. I can give external inconsistencies. So an internal inconsistency is just either a logical contradiction in the idea of a God, or some kind of a paradox, like the idea that God has free will, but at the same time is omniscient. That is, I think, I could put forth a philosophical argument why the idea that you're putting forth has a contradiction at the heart of it.
And we're running out of time, so I'm going to cut in there because that pertains to the next question for John. Does God have free will? And if yes, then why do so many suffer?
Does God have free will, or do we have free will?
Does God
have free will?
I think the
To me-
implicit idea is that if he did, why doesn't he step in?
Oh, okay. So yeah, if is God all powerful? If the question is, why does God allow evil? I believe God has free will. If anybody's got free will, God has free will, but I think we all do. I think if we don't have free will, then it's no different than the materialist position. If you are not a being who can choose, and that's your Christian position, then your position is no different than William Provine's, in my understanding of our humanity. But why does God allow evil? If that's the question, that's also a really, really good question. And I have a lot of people around me right now that are experiencing a lot of suffering, and a good friend of mine has a terminal disease that he's in the later stages of, and it's very hard, it's very, very, very challenging in his physical situation right now. And he just wants to die. And a lot of us have experienced a lot of pain, and a lot of really hard things. And it's very reasonable to look at God and say, if you're there, what is going on? Why don't you stop this? And I think in the end, there's only two answers. God says, one, he says, all I can tell you is, I will. I will. And one day there will be a world, God says, where there will be no mourning or crying or death or pain, because the old order of things will have passed away. God says, I will. But we can still look at God and we can go, that is not good enough, because I am suffering now. And then God just says, I just have one more thing to say to you. Maybe two. I came and I suffered. And I lived in that world. And I walked in all of it. And I know where you're at. I took your suffering world into me. And then he also says, and I am with you in it now. And I have to take that as enough. God, you're going to stop it. God, you know it. And God, you're with me in it now. And you're asking me to walk in it. And I acknowledge there are some things in this world that are so horrific. It is very hard to even have those answers come together in a way that they're sufficient. But I believe that if we truly believe those things, they will be.
All right, so we're a bit over time. I'm going to do one last question because I saw variants of this throughout, and I'm going to make it to both of you. I'm going to phrase it differently though. Spencer, if there isn't a God and there isn't a transcendent purpose, how can we have love or meaning or value in our life? And then to John, it's going to be, okay. And then to John, it's going to be, is a life without God truly valueless and without personhood, as you said earlier? And let's start with Spencer. Then we'll John.
So the question was about how can we have love and meaning in our lives
And value.
and value without there being some kind of a transcendent God?
Transcendent God or purpose.
Okay, some external purpose. So it's intrinsic. We are our own meaning makers. The values that we have is because we all have them subjectively, and that's fine. You don't need to have some kind of a transcendent God to tell you what is moral or tell you how to live your life. I think if you're actually going to be free and to be an autonomous person, you think for yourself and you provide those things for yourself within your community, within your culture, in this world. Humans as a species, something like the Golden Rule has been around long before Christianity or even Confucius. That treat other people the way that you want to be treated. This is just like a human value that most of us share. And it works because if you're going to treat someone the way that you want to be treated, they're going to probably treat you back that same way, and we're all going to get along, and we're all better off when we get along. I think we can all agree with that. But something like love, why would you need a transcendent anything in order to love somebody else? If the Christian God doesn't exist and there is no transcendent deity out there, it's just us on this planet orbiting the sun and we are sitting in here having a conversation, does your love for your parents or your children or your dog, is that diminished in any way? I would say that it's not. I would say it's just the way that you look at it and the way that some preachers have to twist things and manipulate the real world in order to put forth their theology. They have to say that you are worthless, you are broken, you are born broken, you are as you mentioned earlier, that we failed, that humans are a failure, and that the only way to love genuinely is to get it from some outside source because we don't have it within us. I think that's completely backwards. I think that's completely twisted. I think Christianity has to actually create a hole in you in order to fill it. It tries to sell you a cure for a problem that it asserted in the first place. Humans are not born broken. The problem that Christianity has to assert at the very beginning doesn't even exist. Adam and Eve, as an original, like the first humans, genetics doesn't show that. Population genetics has actually shown the opposite, that the human species has evolved as a population. There's always been a population. There's never been only two from the beginning. That just simply isn't true, along with the talking snake, it turns out. So if we look to science and we look to once again, a reliable belief correction procedure and a reliable epistemology, we will come to a different conclusion than what Christian theology puts forth. And there's no need, I would like to have a debate with someone who would want to argue that you do need some transcendent source to love or to have meaning or value. But as I see it, I don't think you do.
And then the question for you was, is a life without God truly without personhood?
Well, if we only come from the impersonal, if we only come from the material, then we can experience value. I can have the experience of I really agree with Spencer with what you shared. I'll still love my kids. I will have that experience. There is nothing transcendent connected with it. There isn't anything real beyond myself other than what I'm experiencing. And I guess that's what I'd say. If there's only, it's like E.O. Wilson said, ethics are an illusion fobbed off on us by our genes. You can surely experience the illusion and enjoy the illusion and live as if the illusion is true. It doesn't really matter in one sense in terms of my experience in this life, but there's nothing transcendent beyond it. It isn't real. And does that matter? I don't know. I would say the real issue in all this more relates to, although this life is part of it for sure, but eternity is the incredible, significant question.
Well, we didn't get through all the questions, but you guys are going to be around afterwards for
Yeah.
questions. All right, excellent.
And can I just say this? One of the things that drives me absolutely crazy is the campus preachers. and the whole environment that creates. And one of my desires, and I know Spencer shared that desire, was to create a different environment. To create an environment where these ideas could be discussed at a whole different level. And I so appreciate these guys' willingness to want to do that also. And I hope you enjoyed this, and you're going to get a chance. Sean's going to tell you about how to write something. If you have another topic you'd like to have us do, or somebody else do, or you just like to have somebody do this kind of forum on some other topic, you're going to get a chance to let us know that. But it would be so great if environments like this were more common than they are.
Excellent. Well, John touched on it, but yeah, on the note card, if there are future topics you want to discuss, or have these two discussed, or just anyone discuss in general, we'll gladly take those into heart. So you can just put them in the box as well. Maybe just write up there like topic or something like that. So thanks again for coming, and both speakers will be at their respective tables or like slightly off to the side. If you do want information about the actual groups that sponsored them, that'll be the table itself. So again, they'll be a little bit off to the side. That way they're not bogging down the table. Again, the sponsors are Secular Student Alliance, Unbeliever Radio, Desertson Church, and Desertson Students. And lastly, we have no affiliation with them, but Joel has asked both speakers if he can. Oh yeah, the other card. Again, there's 4 different organizations on there. If you would like more information from one, drop that in the box as well, and that organization will contact you through whichever method possible.